Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
My name is Dyl, and today we are going to be continuing our 2024 Best Picture Revisiting series, where we return to all 10 nominees, talk about their nominations, their snubs, and our overall thoughts with the films. And as always, we're going to be welcoming in a guest, and today we're going to be diving into a super interesting conversation around the zone of interest with someone who works in the sound field. So Matt, go ahead and take us away with our guest.
Well, we got Lucas here, and I'm just going to answer the title of the video real quick. Can the zone of interest win Best Picture? No, it can't. But we're going to talk about it anyways, and we're going to talk about the merits of this film's 5 nominations. And I'm really excited to have you here, Lucas, because as a sound designer, I am just really excited to hear your thoughts on this movie, which I think has some of the most creative, most ingenious sound design that I've ever heard. So we're definitely going to talk a lot about that. But how are you doing today, Lucas?
I'm good. Yeah, no, thank you guys for having me. Yeah, really excited to have a chat about Zone of Interest. It's a great film to talk about the sound for, because the sound is doing a lot of driving of the story, and it's yeah, really, really crucial to how that film plays out and the emotions that you feel while watching it. So I think that's really, really great to have a conversation about. And yeah, just doing well. Just finished all of my graduation films at school, so that's
Hey,
we're having a
congrats.
big thank you. We're having a big screening of them all next week at the BFI. So yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. So yeah, really excited to do this. Glad we had the time to do it. So yeah, let's jump in.
Awesome. Well, first off, we are going to talk about Best Picture. And through this, we just got to talk about our general thoughts on the movie because obviously there is so much to talk about here. This is a very deep film that you can interpret in many different ways. It has layers on layers on layers. And I'll just say I've seen it 3 times now. The first time that I saw it was at TIFF in the fall. And honestly, after that first screening, I didn't really know what to make of it. I had read about the film beforehand and had kind of built up this expectation of what it would be. And I definitely got that, but I was kind of left feeling like it made all of its points in the first 10 minutes and then repeated from there. And I was like, okay, that could have been a short, but it was interesting. And then as the days went on, I kept thinking about it. And even though it was the first film I saw of the festival, it just stuck with me. And even though I didn't love it, every day I was just like, I'm thinking about this new aspect of Zone of Interest that I didn't catch while watching it. And I spent months being like, I need to see this movie again. I just need to go back. And so the second it opened up in theaters, I was back, and I was right. This film is much, much deeper than I thought on a first watch. And honestly, I can't believe that I ever thought, oh, this is like, it's a short film that is stretched out to a feature. It's a masterpiece in my opinion.
So the first time I saw Zone of Interest, I will admit I didn't fully understand what the film was trying to convey. Like, I thought it was very interesting, very well crafted, but I was like, I get it, but I don't get it at the same time. However, after my second dosage of the Zone of Interest, I have like one word to describe this film, and I think it's fascinating. One thing I greatly appreciate about Zone, even more on this additional viewing, is the cinematography and the production design. The locations where Glazer and his team decides just to place the camera inside this house, I think just engross you into the routine life of the Auschwitz camp commandant and his family. I think it makes you feel like you are one of them, where a scene just plays on and you could just be a bystander in the room. And where I think the strength of Zone very much lays, Mika Levy's haunting score just leaps off the screen. The bold decision to open this film up with just a still black screen and his score just fills your eardrums is one thing I just super dig. And I just hope that A24 hears all of our claims. Please put this one streaming. I want to be able to listen to this whenever, not just when I can maybe find a screening for Zone, because for some reason this movie does not want people to be watched.
I mean, I don't know if I'd ever want to listen to that score again outside of the film's context. It's quite harrowing for me. But yeah, no, I mean that's all really, really interesting viewpoints, because I've only seen it one time. So it's good to have these kind of multiple perspectives on it, because I feel like there's a similar thing that we've all shared with this first viewing, which is I really, really enjoyed it, but I didn't get blown away by it. I thought it was great. But the more that I've sat with it, the stronger my feelings about it have become as time has gone on. And so I watched it at the BFI IMAX, and Honestly, it's probably the first time I watched a film in an IMAX cinema and thought that it was actually detrimental to the film viewing experience,
Hmm.
because it's not a film that I feel like play. It's so quiet and so still when it wants to be. There's obviously big moments, but it's so kind of powerful in its stillness, and the sound is amazing, but it's not bombastic. And so in a space that's that big, it kind of dissipates really quickly. And so I was sitting sort of farther to the back, and by the time that the sound had got to my ears, it was really soft. And so even though I was really deep in it and I was leaning forward and getting really engaged, I still felt like, oh, this would have been better if I was in a much more intimate, smaller space where I was kind of like hearing everything kind of in fuller body. But at the same time, the images were incredible. And I still had, I think, two or three like big gut punch moments during the film. And then also just overall, just this really uneasy feeling, which I think the film does spectacularly well. And I really enjoy it. And I think there's a lot to unpack with it. And, you know, given that it's not even that long, it's like what, 100 minutes or something like that. I feel
Yeah,
like it
it's hour
really,
40.
hour 40 really fills that time completely to the brim.
It's interesting that you say that it didn't play well for you in an IMAX theater because I hadn't thought about that before, but you're absolutely right. This is a very cinematic movie that doesn't feel like it's built for a movie palace of old in the way that so many films are, right? This isn't like a Babylon where it's like you have to go and see it on 70 millimeter. It's honestly benefits from being in like a tiny art house space. Like, you know, there's 12 seats and a screen, and the screen is like a, just a little bit bigger than an average TV, you know, and that's, I think, the space that this is meant for. But I feel like it's a movie that also really benefits from you being in a dark room, completely isolated from the outside. You know, this is going to be one that I don't think will be the same experience ever when it's out on streaming or on Blu-ray and you buy it, but you have access to your phone the whole time and the lights in the room are still on. You know, even down to the way that the film starts with that music spiraling down and down and down, and with the black screen, it's meant to bring you into another world. And I don't know if that's ever going to be captured outside of a theater. But that said, the sound is going to be great with like good quality headphones on.
I can't wait for that kind of audio headphone mix to listen to. But you're right. I think it's a really great example of why the cinema experience is still so important for film. And yeah, the thing with the film is if you can turn away from it, and it's not the most, engaging is the wrong word. It is really engaging, but it's not like kind of in your face engaging where it's sort of
It's
like you
not
sit with
typically
it.
cinematic, right? It defies all of those expectations of cinematic storytelling. So when people might hear about, oh, it's a movie about a Nazi officer and his family and they live beside Auschwitz, people are going to be expecting certain narrative conventions. They're going to be expecting the type of Holocaust movie that they've seen many, many times before. And this defies all of those expectations. And I think I agree. I know what you mean by it's not as engaging because it's not as engaging in that conventional way that we've grown to understand this is what a movie is.
Exactly. That's exactly what I mean. It is super engaging. It's just it's not a standard sort of kind of blockbuster engaging in a way that I think a lot of people nowadays when they watch films sort of expect from the films that they watch. So I can imagine watching it at home or someone who's heard a lot about it and then they decide to watch it at home. They put it on and 10 minutes in, they kind of check their phone and then immediately they're just out of the film, which I think would be such a shame. And so, as an appeal to anybody watching who hasn't seen it yet, if you can watch it in a cinema, please do so because it will be a very different experience than trying to watch this at home on a laptop.
Well, this is a film that's very meticulously crafted, and that all comes from the director's chair of Jonathan Glazer, who did get a nomination here. So I guess my question to both of y'all would be, what were your thoughts about his direction? What things stood out? What things you think were kind of odd but still did work? Because to me, the infrared sequence, at least on the first viewing, was very odd. It took me out a little bit. But on my second viewing, it was one of the standouts where I very much dug those sequences. You're getting a different perspective. You're seeing the little humanity that is in this film, and it's shot in such an unorthodox way where it very much stands out. Show like, hey, this is important. Take this in. Let the only way you can see true greatness in somewhere that you're at is through this lens.
Yeah, the infrared I found to be so interesting. On a first watch, I was completely lost. I didn't understand even where it was in the narrative. I was like, who is this? But watching it again, all of it clicked for me. I often find that I benefit from rewatches because I don't know why. A lot of the time on a first watch, I don't retain every detail. I retain the details that I'm like, this is important. But I only know what's going to be important later on at the very end of a film when I see how it all comes together. And so then when I rewatch the next time, all of those details click into place much better for me. I often feel so stupid for that. For me on a rewatch, I really got the narrative use of it. I really got the thematic use and some of the aesthetic purposes of that, because even in the dark, you still see the smoke rising, and the smoke becomes the brightest part of any of those images. You see the trains pass by, and you see the plumes of steam coming out, and those images are so striking, even beyond allowing us to see these images without the use of artificial lighting, which the film steers clear of entirely. It is just a really interesting use of a new medium to differentiate from the rest of the story and to kind of keep pushing with those themes through the visuals, even in this very unorthodox way. And it brings in this new theme, being that we see someone who is trying to do the right thing, but ultimately still kind of fails at doing the right thing because they don't understand the impacts of their actions can be negative, because obviously they're still on the other side of the wall.
Interestingly enough, I went to the screening I went to, he did a Q&A as well. And the infrared stuff actually, which is unique and bold. And I guess if you've watched some of his previous work, it's not super surprising because I think Under the Skin sort of plays with these sort of similar visual languages. But he mentioned that this infrared thing was out of necessity as opposed to like this sort of super creative decision, in the sense of, as you said, there's no artificial light. And so it was like, how do we get the image of this girl in the dark without using any artificial light? And it was sort of like the one thing that seemed really interesting and useful to do that. And I think almost kind of as an additional bonus, this like really unique visual style came through that. And I think they presented that in such a great way. In terms of the other directing parts of the film, yeah, I mean, as you said, Dill, this kind of like lived in feeling of the film, I think it really, really presents that quite well. Glazer mentioned that it was basically this thing of they would just let the camera sit for 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, and just let the actors kind of like do their thing in the space for days and days on end, just to capture that sort of feeling. And I think that's sort of where that authenticity comes. Very different way of doing filmmaking than someone like David Fincher, who's like extremely, extremely like, this has to go A, B, C, D. Whereas Jonathan Glazer, like, I'm just going to let it sit and I'm going to see what happens. I found that really unique and interesting, and I'm really glad he got the nom, because I feel like it's a film that really, really benefits from a strong directorial vision, and how all those different fields come together in such a unique way. And also with the sound as well, I heard, and this is so abnormal for sound design, I heard that Jonathan Glazer sat with the sound designer, and every single sound that was put in the film was hand approved by him before it was put into the film. So he was really deeply invested in every single aspect of the filmmaking. So yeah, that's not something you see every day, and I really appreciate. So
That's a really interesting take on all of this, because yeah, he kind of just does let life happen in front of the cameras. There's no chasing those big moments, which is often what happens when you get a filmmaker that plans every detail like David Fincher. They're going for the cinematic stuff. They're going for the things that'll tell the story. But what Jonathan Glazer's doing here is, I would call it anti-cinema in a lot of ways, where he's taking every expected idea and breaking it. He's just shifting what a movie is meant to be, what its typically seen as. And he's finding, instead of those big moments, he's finding the moments that are of absolutely no consequence. There's no character growth, there's no big emotional climax. It is just life captured, and that's not something we're used to seeing in cinema. And it makes me think of, all this talk about how do you depict a tragedy? How do you depict something that is absolutely unspeakable? And a lot of people, when you use those cinematic tools that are, very established, those do have oftentimes some white supremacist connotations. And yeah, Jonathan Glazer is breaking all of those norms and saying the only way that you can depict the Holocaust is by simply not making a film about the Holocaust. It's quite interesting, but I want to hear your more takes on sound, because this is obviously, the big reason we've brought you in, is that you are going to have much more insight into the sound design than we have here. And I'd love to hear, what is it that makes this sound design really special to you? And are there any little things that your ears caught that less keen listeners might miss?
I've been hearing about the sound in Zone for a long time. I had friends who went to Cannes and they saw the film and they came back and the first thing they said was like, the sound in this film is so great. And then that's all I heard forever and ever and ever about the film. So I was like, okay, okay, okay. So I have to see what this is all about. Even tutors who came in. We have Paul Davies. He's the guy who sound designed You Were Never Really Here and We Need to Talk About Kevin and stuff. And he came in and said, the sound work in this is like the best I've ever heard in my life. And I was like, okay, geez, okay, gotta watch this film. And it is up there. It's definitely up there. I think what's really interesting about the Zone of Interest sound is it is like you said, Matt, it's not showing the Holocaust is really important for this film, and not showing it in a way that depicts it in kind of a Hollywoodized cinematic way. And so how do you get across that this horrible thing is happening right next door to this house, in that it's all through the sound? Not once are we shown we're shown, the fire and the smoke, I guess, but really not much is shown of literally this big kind of industrial plant of murder happening right next door. And it's all done sonically, and it's there from the very beginning of the film, and it doesn't really ever leave. And what I found really interesting about that is immediately I felt unease listening to that. It has these deep rumbles, but they're sort of, it's so fascinating. It's consistent, but it's inconsistent. There's different sort of energies to it, and it always kind of is monotonous, but not, it kind of is always there, and you always know that it's there. And I found that to be an incredible balance that they pulled off, because in a way, as the film progresses, I felt sort of like the people living there, in the sense that I almost kind of got used to the sound by the end of the film, which I think is like really, really interesting as a thing. But at the same time, when these sort of, I don't know, minor marital disputes or like whatever it is that's going on between the two of them are happening, and they're having these arguments, and you just hear this like rumbling in the background, or the children are playing in the garden, and you hear the screams of people being gassed. It's so deeply unsettling the whole time, and it never really gives you a break. And so I found the way that it used that as a device really engaging. In addition, the score and the sound are kind of working really well together. The music is so sort of abstract and undefined, and it sort of plays really well into some of these sound elements. The opening of the film being just a black screen and this big kind of, I guess it's sort of like a what's it called? The opening of a long epic from like the 50s or something, grand
It's an
sweeping
overture.
music. It's an overture, right? And it feels big and bold. And there's that hard cut as well in the sound when that red screen comes. That's like really, really, it feels wrong, but it also feels like appropriate. I don't know. It just, I don't know, just really, really hit. Everything really hit with the sound. The other thing about the sound too is that it's typically, not always, but mostly quite quiet. I found it's a very kind of calm film sound wise. It's not super loud. It's not very dynamic. It's quite consistently this sort of low hum rumble. And the dialogue's happening and all these things. And what that really did really well is I remember a couple particular moments is when it does kick off sound wise. I'm leaning in, I'm trying to listen to this dialogue, I'm trying to listen to the sound that's going on in the film. Is that when it does kick off, it has this like immediate visceral reaction of like, oh my God, wow, that's horrible. I remember particularly, I think it's the first time at night where you hear the screaming of people as they're getting burned. I just remember being like super, super off put by that. All really works so well together. It never feels like a gimmick. It's so powerful in its storytelling ability. And it's a film that I think actually kind of lives and dies on the sound. I think the film would be a significantly worse or way less impactful film without any of the sound in it. And I think that's such an achievement, because that's what you always really want as a sound designer. You want to be able to say that, you're helping help tell the story, but in Zone of Interest, this it's like a kind of a front facing element that people take notice of and they hear. And yeah, I've never felt that uncomfortable watching something from the sound of a film. And I think what they do it really well in that film. And also what's really interesting is that it's very frontal. It's not really surroundy. In terms of like there's a lot going on in the left, the right, and the center channels. And then when it kind of kicks off or there's music, it goes into the surrounds, but it's typically quite front facing. And so I would be really, really curious to listen to this on headphones and see how that plays out. But I found that a really unique choice is that it's never, and I guess that's part of what I mean when it's not really a gimmick. I feel like if it was playing over here behind you or over there and it was cutting with
Yeah,
perspectives, it
they've
would
got an
be,
Dolby Atmos. It's in
yeah,
10 channels. You hear it
it
above
would,
you.
God, it would feel completely inappropriate. And I think that was a really careful, considered choice to not go crazy with that because you could easily have fallen into a trap of letting that kind of,
Become
oh,
spectacle.
it become a spectacle. And it's exactly the point that you said, Matt, is not supposed to be that.
Yeah, it's nice
Mhm.
to hear from someone who is in this field who can speak a little bit more to it because I know you just mentioned like you don't need that, but there's some stuff that you mentioned there that was new to me that very much will change how I view the sound on my next viewing. I had watched a Glazer interview from I think it was from New York on YouTube the other day where he kind of mentioned what you talked about there at the end where they shot this film originally with none of the other sound and they added all of the exterior sound that wasn't coming from the house in post production. So essentially, there was two different sounds for the film. There was just what's happening inside for their zone, and then the outside zone's sounds come in afterwards, which I think is very just interesting to think about when crafting a project. Because like I don't work in the film industry, I do more stuff in like live entertainment. So to think about how you would switch those up there just changes the game entirely. But another point I want to go back to that you made, which was one of my biggest takeaways when watching the film, was how quiet the sound was to begin with. The film starts, you don't really hear much of what's going on. There may be occasional gunshot here, an occasional scream here, occasional order from an officer over here, but it's not very apparent until you get to that scene where you talked about where you are in the camp with that tilt up shot where it's overtly loud, it's bold, it's in your face. You leave, you come back, and from the rest of the point on, after you get that one jolt of sound, it stays a little bit louder throughout. And there's some scenes where it's very apparent, some scenes where maybe it's a little less, but no matter where you're at in the house, you could be out in the greenhouse, you could be at the little pool they have, you could be in someone's room. You know exactly what's going on across the street. There's the scene with the boys in their room where he says, "Don't do that again," where it sounds like you're right there, they're right outside the window, even if they're probably a little bit further than they actually were there. I just think the sound design, as you mentioned, is so engrossing and gross as well because like as a viewer you don't really want to be hearing all that stuff, but that's what the point of this film is. Matt made the comparison to Schindler's List earlier where Schindler's List may be the more easier film to watch, the more palpable film for a lot of people, but I think Zone of Interest will go down as the definitive Holocaust movie where
I want to touch on a couple of sound notes that you made there that I found really interesting because so one of them was it's really fascinating how, as the film goes on, and this rumble that at first feels so horrifying and you notice it so apparently, it does kind of fade into white noise, and it becomes like just a part of the film, just a part of the texture of everything. And that is it's really an interesting way to tell this story where you almost like the characters become numb to the suffering that you are hearing the entire time. And that's such a fascinating approach to it. So often, great sound work is completely invisible. It's something that no one ever notices at all. And that's every year the Oscars sound category. It nominates loud films. It nominates films that are like, there are motors, there are gunshots, because those are the films that people notice the sound design in. Oftentimes, the best films oftentimes the best sound work in film is the sound work that you just genuinely don't notice is there, which I can only imagine, Lucas, is frustrating as a sound designer, because the work that really impresses you and the work that you're really proud of is always going to be stuff that audience members aren't going to appreciate as much because it becomes invisible. And what I think is so interesting about Zone of Interest is it flips the script and it makes it so that the images become secondary to the storytelling, to the sound. And that is the reverse of what it's always been in cinema. And it makes audiences appreciate the sound, because we want to look over the wall and we can't look over the wall. And yet it's still showing us what's happening by giving us this audio track. We understand what's happening. It's not breaking the rule of show, don't tell, because it's not telling us anything. It's still showing it. It is very much using our senses to explain what's happening without ever directly explaining anything. And it really goes to show that Jonathan Glazer has such a respect for the craft work of sound designers, of sound recordists, and I really appreciate that.
In addition, Dill, that thing about the kind of the two different spaces and recording things afterwards, that's really interesting, because Jonathan Glazer said in this Q&A that that scene of the kids again playing with the teeth, one of the kids says something or kind of like hums something, I think, or whatever it is. He does a little something with his mouth and hums something. And Jonathan Glazer sent that off to the sound designer and said, look, he said he does this weird thing. And remember, there's nothing recorded on set. It's just these two kids playing around. He goes, look, can you do something with the machinery of Auschwitz to sound like this humming that the kid is doing, so that it sounds like he's like listening to this thing in his head and, replicating it as he's playing with his brother. And the sound designer came back, did it, and it was like, oh yeah, so this is these great kind of things that happen with sound, and what you can allow yourself to do with sound, because it isn't something that's captured on set all the time, or well, dialogue is, but everything else, it allows you to be able to sort of have these ideas and play with these ideas in post, and really pull together something that probably would have worked okay before, but then you get to have an idea like that and it really brings everything together, and it's such a fun and exciting blank canvas to be working with. And so yeah, I really think Zone is spectacular for the limitless possibilities that you can have with sound. And also what it's doing as well with this Auschwitz stuff is it's sort of like a horror film, in the way that, in a horror film, you don't want to show the monster off too early, because then no one really cares and no one's really scared by it. In the same way, the sound of Auschwitz probably makes the feeling of that way worse, because you don't really know what's going on, or you can't see it. So you have to imagine it yourself. And surely, no matter what, even if they had filmed it, what you're thinking in your head will feel a lot worse than whatever they could have shown you, because if you did see it, you might be like, oh, that looks a bit fake, or oh, that looks a bit cheesy. I don't really buy that that's really happening. But when it's only in your head, it feels real, and so it kind of adds this extra level of reality and visceralness to the film. So, yeah.
So, Zone of Interest, I think we all agree, has amazing sound work, but sadly, it probably won't end up winning the Oscar. But International Feature is an Oscar where it will take home the victory. However, I think there's a big question here. Anatomy of a Fall wasn't submitted by France. If it was in this category, do you think Zone wins, or do you think Anatomy wins? Because I think they both have a really great case. Obviously, Anatomy has more on paper in terms of nominations, but Zone just... I think it's a film that can speak to so many different people, where Anatomy, maybe you love it, but there's also the fair share of people who just don't get it. And even if you don't love Zone, you have to respect all the craftsmanship that went into it, Glazer's vision, and how different of a story it is, where maybe that could be polarizing for some people. But I even think the people who walk away saying like, oh, I was a little bored, or I was a little disappointed, they're still going to say that was still a work of art.
Yeah, no. Well, now I'm going to take off my sound designer cap and put my Oscar analysis hat on. Fundamentally, I think I mean, I didn't think so at the time because I understood to an extent the reason that France didn't submit Anatomy of a Fall. I know there's some other politics going on, but for me, I felt like the reason was that I felt like it was borderline on the French English thing. And I think maybe that's what kind of steered them away, or that was at least one of the contributing factors to steer them away, which I sort of understood. But I think as time has progressed, it seems quite clear that it's one of the bigger blunders that France has made in the submissions category, given how well Anatomy's done outside of international feature. With that being said, Zone of Interest is great. I think it should definitely be winning that category from what I've seen. Even though I love Perfect Days as well, and a bunch of other films in that category. But if Anatomy of Fall was in, I think it would win. And the reason I think it would win is that it's an it's an easier watch. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like it's a more
Hmm.
entertaining, digestible film. It's dialogue heavy. The story's really interesting. The performances are great. It's kind of it has this hook of who done it, what really happened, what's the truth. And I think that's quite clear because of the other categories that it got nominated for outside of international feature. I feel like it just has a bit more staying power in terms of Oscar voting than Zone of Interest. But I feel like Zone of Interest is really respected, but not loved. And I feel like Anatomy of a Fall would have more passion if they were both in the same category.
That makes full sense.
Completely agree. I think it's no question to me that Anatomy of a Fall would win if it was in the category, just like it's no question right now that Zone of Interest will win. I think what's more interesting is would we entertain that it's a race at that point? Like, would we be feeling like, oh, there could be something else that happens, or would it just be Anatomy all the way? Because right now, it's been, what, like 6 years where every year we know the winner of that category months before it happens because 2018 we had Roma, which was nominated for Best Picture and was a near front runner for that. We had Parasite, which won Best Picture. We had Another Round, which was nominated in Best Director, while no other movies in that category were nominated anywhere else. 2021 we had Drive My Car, and that was nominated for Best Picture, and yes, Worst Person in the World had another nomination in Screenplay, but it still didn't feel like a race because one of them was a Best Picture nominee. Then All Quiet, and this year Zone of Interest. And that means every year in the past there's been a film that's so far out front because it's nominated in these above the line categories. And I would have just loved to see how does it play out? Do we sort of question what the winner is a little bit more if we have two Best Picture nominees in the category instead of just one as we have every single year?
I think we would have. That was really what my case was before. I think it would have been a race, but Anatomy would clearly be a little bit ahead of it because it's one head-to-head almost everywhere where it has gone up. But the Oscars did respect Zone. It gave it tech nominations. It also got director. It got adapted screenplay. So it wasn't like, oh, Anatomy's like Drive My Car, where it's nominated all these categories where Worst Person in the World was just one additional category. Zone still had placement in other stuff, but Anatomy still would be the movie out front. So I think it would really come down to voting period. What movie's stronger in that case, where right now I think Anatomy would be the stronger movie, but there is so
Absolutely.
much talk about Zone, about its craft, about its respectness in the field, like Lucas was talking about before, but maybe it doesn't have the passion for those number one votes in that specific category. But another category that both of these films did get nominated in was screenplay. Anatomy and Original, Zone, and Adapted, which I know Matt was very much not believing all season long. I hadn't seen the film,
Oh
but
man.
from people's reports, I'm like, it's hitting at places, like it's getting in where it's like eligible. But from everyone who's talked about, not just Matt, they're like, this isn't a screenplay movie. And I was like, BAFTA's 100% nominated. The BAFTA nominates it and has a shot. And then as we see here at the end of the day, it does make it in. But after watching the movie, because I saw it for the first time on nomination day, I'm like, yeah, I would have been with you the whole season too if I saw this ahead of time. Like, no, this wouldn't get a screenplay. But I think the screenplay is doing wonders here because after watching the film, I know Matt has read it. It's changing so much from the book where really the only thing it's keeping is the location. The characters are a little bit different. The plot is a little bit different, and it's kind of reinventing the story, where I think that's kind of where the nomination comes from. Kind of like the Killers of the Flower Moon situation, but Killers didn't get nominated. It's changing the story, making it more interesting, where Killers, maybe you could say the story change isn't really what they're saying they're changing. But here, I just think it's able to change so much in an interesting dynamic, because I think what Glazer and his team's doing with the film, not just the tech elements, sound included, cinematography, score, they're all coming together to play a part into the screenplay. They're all sort of characters. The score introduces you to the film, the cinematography places you into the room, the production design shows you that you are a part of this family. You're no different from them, even if you think on the outside, like, oh yeah, I would never be like them. If I was in this situation, I would speak up. But as we see, people come in and out of this house all the time. They don't speak up. Maybe they leave, but they don't do anything to try to say like what you're doing is wrong. And I just think this screenplay, while it's not one of my favorites of the year, I very much respect it, and I think it's a very, very cool nomination.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good question about this race thing. I have a weird question. Maybe it's a bit outlandish, but I am curious if Anatomy of the Fall had been an international feature contender. I'm curious what you guys think. Would Zone still be as strong of a player outside of international feature categories?
That's a great
Because
question.
I feel like somehow because Anatomy isn't in international features, Zone has kind of taken that international feature that goes above and beyond thing that has happened in the past couple of years and gotten these extra nominations. And I'm curious if it would have gotten that much coverage if Anatomy had been that one for that category.
I think so,
Hmm.
just because of how far back number 11 was this year. What was number 11? Was it May December? Was it Napoleon? Was it Color Purple? Was it Origin? There is no clear number 11. However, if this was like last year, where number 11 is like Babylon, The Whale, where it's really competing, I think maybe Zone would be on the outside looking in. But this year, 11's
Or
so far
Past Lives
back.
would.
Or Past Lives, yeah. But I guess with this hypothetical where Zone's not winning international feature, we've never seen them do to. Maybe it could have been back in a more competitive year, but because of how uncompetitive number 11 was this year, I think it would be fine. And I do agree. I think it's ahead of Past Lives. And even if it wasn't winning international feature, I still think it would get director. It still would get sound. Maybe the screenplay wouldn't come along, but it would still get those 2 additional nominations.
I guess what I'd say is I don't think that the frontrunner buzz in international feature is what has pushed it into the Oscar race, as Drive My Car had, as not even All Quiet, because All Quiet got in based on text, not on international feature, because it wasn't winning international feature anywhere. It lost Golden Globe to Argentina in 1985. It lost the Critics' Choice to RRR. So it wasn't really getting in off of the back of that. And likewise, Zone of Interest this year hasn't won any international feature categories, because everywhere that has an international feature category that the Oscars pay attention to is giving it to either Anatomy or Past Lives. And Zone of Interest is always number 2 or number 3 in those categories. What it says to me is that there's a growing block of voters that really likes this type of film. And now that there's enough of those voters that they have the power to bring in more than one of that type of film. Because in previous years, it's been like, all right, you get one and that's it. And that was just based on the numbers of that specific branch. But now there are more and more, I would say, like international voters. There are more and more people from outside of America, and there are more and more people from outside the Hollywood system who are able to vote outside of the Hollywood system. There are so many very well-regarded art house European directors that typically wouldn't be represented in this American body, but now they are.
Speaking of those other categories, Zone did have a few snubs. It can't get in everywhere, even if some of us would like for it to get some of these nominations. These include cinematography, production design, score, and I guess just to circle through these real quick before we move into the conclusion of this episode, I mentioned the score before. I think it's truly like a character in this film. It introduces you to this world. It sets you to the tone of this film, and it kind of leaves, and then it comes back once we get some of those infrared sequences, which I think, as I mentioned before, are just very thought-provoking. They're very interesting, and even if they weren't intended, they were just out of necessity, I think they add so much to this film and add a whole new dynamic that wasn't really there before. The cinematography is not really picturesque like a painting, but it still has so many beautiful stills where maybe beautiful is not the right word, but it has stills that will be ingrained, striking, that are going to be ingrained to your head. I still have the one where he's by the pool in the backyard smoking, and you can just see the smoke behind him. During what we've been watching episode where Matt and I talked about Zone, I still think the sequence where the 2 little boys are kind of like pushing each other around, and one puts the other one into the greenhouse, locks the door, and points a stick like a gun is such a provoking sequence that could be part screenplay, part cinematography, part editing, how they're all putting that together. And I just think at the end of how the scene is set with Rudolph walking down those stairs is such, like, maybe it's not doing so much with the camera, but it's just so striking with the combination of what is going on in that sequence outside of just walking down the stairs. I think the tech elements of this film, as I said before, say it again, are like a character. It's so engrossing and makes you feel like you are amongst this family where, again, you probably don't want to consider yourself just like these people, but if you were in the situation, it's putting you into that situation where you truly have to think about, what would I do here? What would be my actions? Am I following? Am I leaving? What exactly would I do? And I just think this film is just so thought-provoking where, like I said before, is it my favorite movie of the year? No, but it's definitely one of the ones that's going to stay on my mind long past this award season.
I think further than that, it's not even, asking what you would do if you were them. It's insisting that fundamentally, living in Western civilization, we are living their lives. We are in some way benefiting off of our complicity and our silence around atrocities. We are wearing clothes made in sweatshops. We're using phones that are built from lithium mines, and all of our life has all of these things that have kind of pushed us forward off of horrors unimaginable. And those are things that people ignore because it's comfortable and convenient to ignore those uncomfortable truths about life. And the other thing I'd say about that is it's also, I guess, indicting this entire way of life, this sort of settler colonial mindset of, placing down roots in a new place and building a home and getting this perfect garden. That mindset is and always has been rooted in white supremacy. Always has been, you conquer, you go out and you make the world fit you. And they even say this in the film multiple times. Sandra Hüller being like, they're on the dock by the river, and she says, "We're living exactly the way that the Führer intended. This is what he told us to do." And the fact that their life is so boring and mundane, you hear people talk about the banality of evil, but it's really also about the evil of the banal. Their boring, average, ordinary life is in and of itself a sort of structure of evil. And the way that we've sort of thought of this cottagecore lifestyle, it actually is. It's evil, and it is the source of this pain, because it is all about making others suffer so that you can have a little bit more convenience in your life. And that's, I think, a lot of what the film's talking about. And to that point, I'll talk about the production design, which I think is masterful. It is just to see images of the actual house. I wasn't aware that this had basically entirely recreated this to look exactly as it once did. It's spectacular work, and the details that went into it, and the way that watching it, you almost feel like it's stranger than fiction.
I mean, fully agree with everything you both said. Actually, I think you've really kind of described the film in great detail on these technical aspects. I think as well that the cinematography in that final kind of moment of the shot when we go to present day and there's the cleaners cleaning the Auschwitz memorial. I think that really speaks to what you're speaking about, Matt, in that it we are still complicit in this. It's like we still benefit weirdly from these things and other kind of atrocities, but like this kind of we go through this museum in passing, sort of like without really thinking about it. It's not really something that kind of holds our attention. These people cleaning, like polishing up, making sure that everything looks pretty, all these burnt shoes and all this stuff. It's just kind of this surreal thing to sort of, I guess, not glamorize is the wrong word, but sort of like hold as sort of like a touristy thing to do. Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
weird sort of disconnect between what was actually happening and how we view it in the present day, which I found really
Mm-hmm.
really powerful in that section. So yeah.
In a way, I just thought of this. In a way, we've spent the entire movie not seeing what's happening. And when we cut to that museum scene, we finally see what's happening. But I think the question that you just brought up, which is that people act as though this is like a touristy thing, that they have to go and see the Holocaust Museum at Auschwitz, are they really still seeing? You know, we can see what happened, but are we grasping it? Are we really understanding it? Are we really seeing it? And when he looks into the future in that moment, when he sees down the hallway the effects of his actions, is he really seeing it? I don't know.
And the actions of those cleaners too. I mean the performances of those cleaners. I guess they might be real cleaners, but
I think they're real cleaners.
this like unfazed, like this is just my like regular job. I come and do this every day thing, like cleaning up
Oh, it
these
becomes
like
like the white noise.
it becomes like the white noise, right? That was the other thing is the vacuum cleaners going and all that. I thought it was such a brilliant little touch in the film.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's actually it's still going on. It's still the same thing, we live right beside this sort of evil, and it's kind of the same thing of not really paying attention to it, which I thought was fascinating. And the production design as well, I heard that they went to the real house that is actually like beside Auschwitz and decided to not use it because it was um everything was too dated slightly. Like it needed to feel old but like fresh, like these like
Yeah.
brand new couches, brand new everything. And I found that really interesting that they even went to the like I found that was really interesting because I think they shot really close by, if I'm not
Yep.
mistaken, as well. And I think that's also really interesting as an actor or something as well, sort of having to physically be that close to where this stuff was happening. I can imagine. I think it comes through in the performances actually as well. In addition, I think one of the snubs is Sandra Hüller for supporting actress. To be honest, I thought she was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of like knowing in the back of your head that something's a bit off, but choosing to ignore it and repress it. I thought that was really really great, and I think the production design really kind of brings something to that, the kind of the nice garden, but it's not that nice. And like all these things, it's like
It's fine. The
it's
flowers are all
fine.
wilting a little bit. Like,
Yeah, it's like it's okay. It's not this like beautiful life, but it's interesting how indoctrinated these people were into believing that this was the thing, this was the dream, this was the German dream, I guess. If you have an American dream, this must have been the German one. So yeah, I found the production design to be really effective for that. And I haven't seen El Conde, so I can't really judge it, but I am really shocked that Zone of Interest didn't actually manage to sneak into cinematography. So
You make a great point about Sandra Hüller, which I think is our final sub to talk about before we get to your preferential ballot. Zone of Interest obviously is not an acting showcase, but without the actors we do have, I just don't see this working nearly as well as it does. I think Sandra Hüller, who plays Hedwig in the film, has, I think, the best 2023 of any actor or actress. I think she should have been double nominated, and especially after the second viewing, just like the way she's able to sell the brutality and lack of humanity, I just think it's so effective. And then on the other side of things, I mean, Hula's been getting all the talk where she's in supporting. I think she's a co-lead, but she's in supporting. I think her co-lead, Christian Friedel, who plays Rudolph, is doing equally as well. He doesn't get as many moments to really explode like Sandra Hüller does, but there's his showcase of a lack of any of emotion. He's so reserved. Like you said, like the workers in the modern day, it just seems like this is an everyday thing for him. He just walks in, does his stuff, comes home, does his routine of turning off the lights, and everything's normal. And I'd say this is a role where many actors, no matter how good of an actor they could do so well. And this is a small thing, but I like how his voice isn't overtly deep. He kind of has a little bit of a lighter voice, so it's showing that
he
sometimes
does.
the biggest villains aren't the most stereotypical, like masculine or big brooding in your face. The villains can be anyone. It's all about what your actions are. And I guess to close out, to be kind of corny, referring to the film's title, I loved how they just express the different people's zones of interest, and like how Hedwig is just focusing on what's inside of the gates, with the garden, the family possibly having a move, and her mother comes to visit, which I think is another great performance in this film, where we don't get much much of it, but when she's on screen, you can feel the horror that's on her eyes after that first day, after her first night having to listen to it all night, and she can only focus on what's on the other side of the gate, across the street. I just think that kind of goes back to the screenplay as well. I just think it's so effective in how it's trying to tell that story, and I think the performances here from top to bottom are standouts, even if they aren't the most showy. That's going to lead us into, I think, the fun part of these episodes, bringing on a guest, hearing their preferential ballots, because we're going to have 10 different ballots plus Matt and my own. We're going to have a lot of different rankings here. We've heard Sierra's, we've heard Josh's, now it's time for Lucas. So have you seen all 10 films?
I actually I missed American Fiction this week, so I still haven't seen it.
Okay.
So
So-
it's
Okay,
out
so
of the
it's alright.
ranking.
For today, it will be out, but when you update it, we'll let everyone know what your updated thoughts are.
I'm gonna watch it this week, so hopefully I can get it to you as
Hope
soon
you
as
like it.
possible. Hey, me too. And so without American Fiction, okay, I just have the list up. Let me just look. Okay, so at the bottom, I think I don't know. This is at the bottom is probably gonna have to be Maestro. That's number
Predictable,
nine.
but yeah, it
I'm
makes
s- I,
sense.
I'm sorry, Dill. Oh, I
I like
know, but
Maestro. I'm the
I
Maestro fan.
oh, you're the Maestro.
I'm the Maestro fan.
There's someone else in the Discord who's a big Maestro fan. I can't remember anymore.
There's a
But
few others. Yeah.
There's
sorry to
dozens of y'all.
there's dozens of you. Yeah, it's fine. I don't know what else to say. I think it's better than I expected it to be. It's extremely Oscar baity. I think in a way that detracts occasionally from the film. I think Bradley Cooper's great, but there's never a moment where I'm not thinking he's trying to win an Oscar for this, which I think is a bit of a shame. I think the makeup is phenomenal. I think the sound is really good. It feels a little bit aimless, in my opinion. I feel like it's just like not really going anywhere for a long period of time. It's just sort of, I don't know. I just feel like it didn't have as much purpose as maybe I wanted it to. I mean, it comes together nicely at the end, but I don't know. It was fine. It's not terrible. I actually think that this list, I think it's like my highest average ranking year of the Oscars, Best
Same
Picture.
for
So
me.
Hmm.
it's actually not, it's not like a bottom, it's not bad by any means, but I think it's definitely my number nine. Oppenheimer, it's fine. It's good. It's a Christopher Nolan big epic mega biopic. It does its job. It's corny as hell. I
What, you didn't like the I am become death scene?
I straight up
Yeah,
laughed in the cinema.
there's this little guy from Massachusetts. What's his name? Kennedy?
Oh yeah. That new senator from
Oh God,
dropping it
the
like it's
Avengers
the
moment.
it feels like when in The Dark Knight Rises they're like, "Oh, you should use your real name. It's so pretty. Robin."
Oh no, I like
Same
it
thing.
for the callback to Tenet. Oh, Oppenheimer crafts this. So next Nolan movie is going to be a JFK biopic. I'm calling it now. He's teasing his next films each time along.
The Nolan cinematic universe. No, I don't know. It's good. Cillian Murphy's really good. There's really a lot of stuff to like about it. It's entertaining. I watched it in a bad way. I watched it the cinema I was in cut it in half, which really screwed up the pacing for me as well. It was on 70 mil. They only had one projector to do it on, so they had to cut it midway to roll up the second bit
Oh,
of the
okay.
film. Um, Ruined the pacing, probably, to be fair. But at the same time, there's just other bits of it. I found it really goofy. I found some stuff really great. I found the subjective moments of after the success of it and the kind of the shaking of the room that happens in that interview scene and all those things really, really interesting. But overall, yeah, it's a Nolan film. I don't know. I don't love him. I feel like he's really good, but not he's never made something spectacular for me. And so Oppenheimer's sort of bottom of the ranking. Again, a film that I heard so much about and I thought was going to be like, this spectacular, mind-blowing piece of work. It's gone up in my estimation since I've seen it a bit. I didn't find it to blow me away. I thought it was really good. I thought the performance was great. I thought the screenwriting was good. I found the direction to be a little bit hit or miss at times, and some of the editing to be a bit, I don't know. But overall, I did really enjoy it, but it just never hit me as hard as maybe I expected it to. It's getting tough because I really like all these other films a lot. Um, it's probably gonna be Zone of Interest. Actually,
Okay.
I
Okay.
think I think that I'm saying that is I need to rewatch Zone of Interest again to really bring my appreciation of it up. This conversation has helped a lot, but on initial watch, it was definitely like one of those films I really appreciated, but wasn't like a passion pick, I guess. So if I'm thinking like an Oscar voter, that's probably where my head would be at.
That's so
Um,
fair. It makes sense perfectly.
it makes sense. Okay, good. Number five, then probably gonna be Barbie. Really love Barbie. I think it's great. I think what it does really well, it does really well. It has its issues, but it's so fun. And I thought it was just such a clever way of making a film that could have been so, I mean, it is so commercial and everything, but it could have been a lot worse, I guess, is what I'm always really impressed by Greta Gerwig with that film is that this film could have sucked. This could have been such a terrible movie, and it actually turned out really good and really emotional. Like I kind of cried at the end, which was all like, "What's going on?" That Billie Eilish song, right? So I really, really enjoyed Barbie, and the Barbenheimer double feature. I did it, and God, I'm so glad I did Barbie second, and also got drunk for it. That was a spectacular day last year. So that's number five. Number four. Um, Hmm. Hmm. I guess I guess it's gonna be the holdovers for me.
Nice.
Because I love the holdovers. I think it's a really great, simple, effective film told really well. Really kind of does that 70s aesthetic without being too kitschy about it, which I really, really appreciated. Performances across the board, great. Found the script to be really funny. Sorry, Dill, I know you found some of it to be a bit corny, but I really enjoyed it. So, yeah, one of those, and also one of those films that I feel like it's so rare these days to have a film that I can recommend to pretty much anybody in my family and they'll actually really like it. And I feel like Holdovers is just a great crowd pleaser. So that means that number three is Killers of the Flower Moon.
Ooh.
Um,
Hmm.
hmm
Didn't
hmm
expect that. I was expecting that higher.
I mean, I love it. It's great. I think it's a great film. And that my piece on it. It's Scorsese's just he's an absolute master. Every time he makes a film, I'm just so in love and so engaged. The performances are great. I think Leah should have been nominated. That's my own opinion. I haven't seen American Fiction, so maybe I'll take that back once I watch it.
Have you seen
Um,
Rustin though? Because that's really swap out moment to bingo.
Hey,
That's
hey,
what it is.
I
that's not
haven't
who you
seen
take
it.
out
I
from that
haven't seen
lineup.
it. I skipped that film because I didn't think it was actually a serious contender. So whoops.
Yeah.
But I will have to watch it. But I do think Killers of the Flower Moon is really strong, really powerful. I think it does what it can in terms of narrative storytelling from where it started to where it ended. I think it does what it can. I think the idea of it being from a white filmmaker is part of the problem, I guess. Also, something that I feel like that was the best version that he probably could have made of that film. And I'm looking forward to hearing an indigenous version of that type of story in the future. But I do think a film like this opens that door in a way that's really, really useful to getting those films made. And so, for a lot of reasons, I found Killers of the Flower Moon to be really great. And also opening this can of history to a bunch of people who probably don't know it and forgot about it and how awful and horrific it was, and still making it entertaining, which I guess is sort of the antithesis of Zone of Interest in a way. But I don't know. When Scorsese makes these films, it just I don't know, just really tickles something in me. So yeah, really, really enjoyed it. Then my second is going to be Poor Things, because yeah, great. I mean, well, Yorgos Lanthimos is still coming up, but I mean, what a master of his craft already at this point in his career. So unique, so singular. You know exactly what type of film. Well, you don't know exactly what type of film, but you know what kind of style you're getting with his films. And I think that's such an impressive thing to have in an era where there's so many filmmakers and so many things just feel the same. He's really, really unique and has a great vision and voice. Performances, incredible, phenomenal performance. Emma Stone probably gives the best performance of her career, in my opinion. Mark Ruffalo surprised the hell out of me in this film. I'm not really a Mark Ruffalo guy, and then this really kind of pulled it out for me. Production design, yeah, great. Give it the Oscar at this point.
Same sound
Cinematography,
designer as
incredible.
Zone of Interest, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. And also really great, really interesting, inventive, unique sound design that really works with the music and kind of tells this quirky story. Thought it was an absolute blast, absolutely fantastic. Thought it had this great I guess if Barbie's like feminism 101, I guess Poor Things is like the next step up from that in terms of themes
Yeah,
and
102.
thematic elements. It's 102. And I thought it did a great job of that. I also found it to be this great thing of analyzing how we view sex as a thing and how we put so much weight on it as people because it takes such this big precedence in our lives. And what would that be like if you didn't have that aspect of your brain? I found that to be such an interesting thing to be questioning and ask, and how it's presented I thought was just absolutely fabulous across the board, which means that my number one preferential ballot is Past Lives, which
Wow.
I know people might not think it should even be in the 10 potentially. I don't know, but I love Past Lives. I don't know what to say. I watched it in Berlin last year for the first time and had an absolute big cry in this big public cinema because I think it's a film that really works for you if you um, have had a situation that's similar, or if you recognize yourself in those characters, and I do, and so it was very very emotional for me in terms of that what could have been potentially thing, and all very devastating and heartbreaking. Thought it was just so pure and so well made. The performances are so beautiful, and yeah, everything about it just really kind of took me away. And then the second time I watched it, I had another really big cry. So it still hit me even harder the second time. And yeah, I would love to have seen it get more recognition at the Oscars. I hope it does get screenplay. That would be great. I'm not sure anymore, but it would be wonderful to see that happen. And yeah, really looking forward to whatever Celine Song does next because that was spectacular. So there you go. That's my list.
It's a good list.
That is going to bring us to the conclusion of this episode, revisiting the zone of interest. Make sure, for everyone out there, make sure to drop a like, a comment, subscription, because up next we have Anatomy of a Fall with Arno. Going to be a super fun episode, but until then, my name's Dyl.
And my name is Matt, and that's Lucas. Thank you so much for joining us, and this has been Fantasy Filmball.